Welcome to the final Poet's Voice reading of our season. A few weeks ago, I traveled to the Alps to meet with some translators and decided to be altogether alpine and take a hike. On that hike, I encountered a series of signs. The first one asked, in German, "What happens to you when you die?" And the subsequent signs that led up the hill only thickened the conjectural plot. That a space had been made for such questions was frankly as elating to me as reading a poet who launches her Franzen/Hardy-esque titled book, The Accounts, with a poem about the light-hearted King Lear. The question struck me as wonderfully un-American. Here, City Bike might have sponsored the trail with intermittent ads by Nike, ads that point toward the already known at the expense of the unknown. And the signs were utterly elemental and resonant with their environs, allowing different stretches of land to pass rhythmically between their provocative punctums. Much like the work of our readers this evening, the signs framed a native, unadorned space in which to formulate these vital and difficult fundamentals, in which, as Katie Peterson writes, to administer the hollow. I was surprised when sharing these alpine signs with a few acquaintances that several of them called their tone dark, a term that has strangely at times accompanied reviews of our other esteemed reader this evening, Louise Glück. I've always been troubled about this appellation, which seems to bespeak more the reader's discomfort and unsettled awakening than the actual status of the poems and their inimitable lucidity. Snow has turned the world into a cemetery, writes Roberto Juarez, but the world already was a cemetery, and the snow has only come to announce it. In that analogy, the work of Glück and Peterson could be said to play the role of the snow. They do not invent the situation, but they have the audacity and acuity to articulate and acknowledge it. In the Cavelian sense of acknowledgement, their work operates as the shocking opposite of avoidance. It is a privilege to have two readers of such enduring courage and clarity among us this evening. Please welcome Katie Peterson and Louise Glück, who will read in that order.
Spring. I have been trying to read King Lear. End up drinking red wine and talking about the tropics. Thought there might be a poem in the play, maybe the way he talks about the button on his coat before he dies standing, carrying the body of the hanged. Maybe the part where she refuses to bargain and the maps on the table are redrawn. I am sleeping. Elsewhere, you are finishing Tess of the D'Urbervilles, those last chapters, before they end up at Stonehenge, and Angel says to Tess, "Sleepy, my dear, I think you are lying on the altar." The part where the book lets them hold each other without sleepwalking or lies. Angel has traded in his harp for a tin kettle and bread. They picnic in a damask-curtained bed, a fugitive and an accomplice. I may be turning toward the branch of apple blossom bearing its burden of the raindrops in an even more buoyant aspect than the night before. Now you are the caretaker, finding Tess's fine silk stockings draped on the damask coverlet in the house they squat in, giving both of them away. The tree in the side yard, not yet in the kind of flower to release it and uncover it again. Everything, everything, and before everything, the possibility of something else, the moment when a moral gets minced by an account a body makes of any other body, and time takes place instead of taking time. Cordelia, with the armies of her husband scouring the unharvested corn of her homeland for her naked, wandering, delusional father. Tess at the dairy, good at her job. Angel in the field, his fingers on the strings of his harp. You carrying me into a lake in August, the summer my mother left the earth. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Christina and the Woodberry. And thank you so much, Louise. It's a gift for friendship. Double rainbow. I'm going to read tonight from my third book, The Accounts, and it's a book about grief, and since it's a book about grief, it's a book about disorientation. And one of the most disorienting experiences I know is being a guest in someone else's house. Enough. So many forget-me-nots, with their white centers, scattered, you'd say, if there weren't so many everywhere, as many as the stars last night in between the branches above the porch behind the house. Was it an argument, or were there just things they had to say? I could have faith in so many creatures. The old setter from the neighbor yard who follows me around the corner and no longer, the chick with its new beak just past breakable, whose lighter top feathers have a bit of flight, any mother bear. You say things, and the next day it's like they don't matter. We want our faces to alter, though we don't want to get older, neither do we want to get younger. Repetition with less knowledge is ridiculous. Just ask the Greeks. You get to keep being a tree, but without the branch that showed the sky your star-like shape? I don't think so. Steadiness can be useful, but my loyalty loves a form that will follow me through changes. At a diagonal, the dark woods on the back slope have enough space to walk between, not enough to hide. He looks into them and writes notes to his mother. She looks into them and finds alignment, or looks for what she wants. She has a human skeleton on her desk. He has a protractor. I had wishes for both of them yesterday, but the weather has become so kindly, so temperate, I forget what blessings they don't think they have. I grew up somewhere without seasons, so people like to ask me what I think of them, whether I like them. I like it when they change. Rest. When I look at the field, it is still the field of possibility. Frost comes, and the heat lifts to see it melt, to see the heat of the sun persist, even though winter is on the way. I am more optimistic those days when the weather is unseasonable. Indian summer, this, to me, is the dregs of a thing. It is the wedding ring in a mind after a sexual dream. The point of sex is for both parties to perform the same activity, according to the poet who is afraid of death the way he is afraid of the sun. But he sees himself and his object running through a gate, not a field. In the middle section of the book, I tried to talk about the last 4 days of my mother's life when we brought her home into hospice care, because when I was writing the poems, I needed a way to sort of limit what I was talking about, a way to make it smaller. And In doing this, of course, in trying to write these elegies from this dramatic point of view, I ended up barely writing about her at all. I'm going to read 2 poems from the middle section. This one is called Eulogy. Morning, brilliant light, the arms of the lawn chair and the exhaustion of the eyes, the edges of the yard pin-tucked into place, the root of the orange tree and the earth filled with sweet alyssum hinges on it like a human hip bending to pick a coin up. My father is writing my mother's eulogy. She isn't dead. Last night was the last night of language. Words had already stopped days before, but last night it appeared she discovered a new language. In blinks, she asked for coffee, then for the first song from the Bill Evans Trio's Waltz for Debbie. Or we asked her, and she said yes, and yes looked like both eyes shut at once. Under the sun umbrella, beneath the nest, my father has just finished writing his account of her life. Eloquent but very simple, factual and correct. It does not pander with jokes, as its writer is already liked. Habitual, it shies from anecdote. A perfect wife, she contains sweetness, but not as in sugar in cube form, not formal, but sweet as in honey dissolved in lemon juice for a sick friend with a sore throat. I am also in his speech. I say something that resolves death. The yard fills with sentences now. The yard accepts another hour of closer sunlight. In the speech, I say all time is extra. I say we are lucky under palm trees. The imagery that dominates my father's complex diction is that of light, his draft full of tiny crossings out. The mother robin polices the nest with her absence. She hides it. She knows gratitude for safety can't save her. It would be gratitude to a predator for not eating her, and that's only as good as silence. Sometimes I teach at a school called Deep Springs College, and one of the things we try to do there is create conversations where the instructor doesn't talk that much. And one of the conditions of that kind of a conversation is to begin with a question. In the summer when I was teaching at Deep Springs, we developed this way of thinking about it where you had to start the class with a genuine question. And this led to all sorts of problems because we kept calling each other out on whether or not our questions were genuine or not. Okay? So this poem begins with a genuine question. You know that because I'm telling you. The body. Was the body taken up by the angels? The minister wore a caftan, an African design, quite red, and misunderstood the location of the plot. The uncle, who had not been asked to speak at the rosary, finally got his turn. Who came earlier to dig the hole? How deep and how wide was the hole? Pallbearers are the opposite of angels, earthbound, having a last turn at hand-holding. Their hands turn red, their purpose to hold and not to speak. They stand and wait next to the plot. What distinguished this particular plot from other plots? The branches above the hole make a canopy of shade. Did anyone speak tenderly about that? Did the angels think the snippet of scripture that was read made sense? Did the mourners return home the long way? Whose turn was it to do the dishes? Who untangled the plot, and was it a good one of the last book she read? When they were gone, who filled in the hole with dirt? Who addressed the angels? It only became my turn to speak when everyone else forgot how to speak to each other. To get there, you must turn left at a statue of Victorian angels. You must cross more than one identical plot. At the end of the day, you will see the whole peninsula from the rise of that hill turn red. Who will remember her birth, the streak of red in her hair? I have wanted to speak. I have wanted to tell the whole to close, to become ground, to tell her to turn into earth, to ease into the plot. I have nothing to say to the angels. The angels speak honey, but their throats are red. Their plots are cunning. They are like us. They talk, and their faces turn into holes. So in the last section of the book, I start thinking about the future. And one of the things you start worrying about when you worry about the future is the past. This is a poem about how disorientation can, instead of making you feel like you've lost a sense of place, can become its own condition. From this house, that house. From this house, that house looks like a ship. Through these windows, those shingles are fins for a finer air, a fiercer atmosphere. From California, Massachusetts looks like earth, like it came first, in a time when not every tree was asked to make fruit. From a bent spine, the practitioner comes up, raises the world with her, and at the end of practice lies down again. I knew time because what I did could improve, and persistence of existence equals time, as in served or lived. From a servant's position, the life of the master is cake, sweet. From sweetness's position, I mean a pineapple field. The car we came in feels so far away. From Christmas to Easter, abstemiousness doesn't grace the year. We're eating with the kings the whole time. The Savior is ours. From this bed, the world equals the ship, moving, and we equal the ocean, and the window is the moon, telling us to roll. One of the things about grieving is that you discover that you're living in a world where new things can be made, but something old can't be repaired, can't be fixed. One of the things that can be made is an argument. And in this book, there are a number of poems in a form that I started calling the argument. I called it that because it has two sides, but they're not necessarily two sides of the same argument. This poem is called Argument About Silence. It was a hard house to live in for that season. You'll blame my pessimism, and then because of the hole in the roof, you'll blame my temperament caused by the pine tree cracking in half and falling, as if the two were different, as if I, on a morning in August when nothing else could change who I wanted, happened, a day just like to become, could change the day from my childhood before I could talk, the nose on my face. We found a two-headed snake, or my left-handedness, trying to eat itself. My teacher tried to change that under the same tree and failed. So I want to close by just reading one new poem. After disorientation comes hunger. And I've been writing poems about hunger and appetite. And the first poem I read was a love poem that serves some other purposes. And this is the kind of poem that I've been writing a lot of, which is a love poem that's also a landscape poem. Thank you so much for listening. Provisioning. We were provisioning. I thought we needed more. The road black on either side in both directions until we arrived at a fragile junction. stop sign and supermarket. Each crossroads brings sustenance, holds an argument. We stopped at the grocery store for liquor. Almost letting ourselves be tired, we continued. The argument concerned the public and the private, where we should love. Snow descended on the windows of the vehicle, refraining, not accumulating rhythm. The wipers brushed all of it away toward one side and two ranges of mountains. The older hiding the base of the taller the kind that tempts a climber. I think my father made his peace with death on one of those peaks once. I think he has forgotten. We were finishing the drive from Mexico against the backside of the Sierra in one day. I loved the names of those lonely places we passed so much I felt ashamed to let my mouth linger over syllables. Adelanto. Nothing could convince me anything was fragile. I saw my breath against the windows toward the last pass, beginning with the chute that goes straight up towards the first trees of the bristlecone forest. Then the road turns topsy-turvy before it levels out a mile-long tabletop summit. Anybody wants to speed there. If you do, you miss the single boot hung from a pine tree for no reason. After that, the road becomes a gully. You drove faster than I even noticed. I noticed. You kept going. We argued about where we should live. Beauty must be witnessed to exist. I took the opposite position. I took the side of the icicle, melting at midnight on a day when work had taken it out of everyone sweet enough to notice it. We stopped looking at each other. I know your cheekbone and your forehead by the argument they make. Right now, it is 2 winters later. January, a fragile domesticity. I have no idea what to eat. 2 winters. We continued into the valley. We mended the argument. The cows bedded down in the frozen sage with their identical animal children. You opened a cold beer. The cat had missed me. The owl found a visible shelter in spite of 2 handfuls of snow collecting in the juncture, 2 cottonwood branches made into a perch by their separation from a trunk whose isolate location made the owl easy to see. 2 in the morning, you didn't want to touch me. The next day, you wanted to do everything. Thank you.
It's great to read with Katie. Well, a modified. It's great to spend time with Katie. I don't like reading. I'll read from a new book that will be out in the fall. The book is called Faithful and Virtuous Night, N-I-G-H-T. It's given shape by a long monologue. Within the sections are nested other narrative poems, some of them prose poems, some of them long poems. You won't hear any of the monologue. I'll read some of the other poems. I probably won't say anything from poem to poem. Can you hear? Good. Parable. First, divesting ourselves of worldly goods, as St. Francis teaches, in order that our souls not be distracted by gain and loss, and in order also that our bodies be free to move easily at the mountain passes. We had then to discuss whither or where we might travel, with the second question being, should we have a purpose, against which many of us argued fiercely that such purpose corresponded to worldly goods, meaning a limitation or constriction, whereas others said it was by this word we were consecrated pilgrims rather than wanderers. In our minds, the word translated as a dream, a something sought, so that by concentrating we might see it glimmering among the stones and not pass blindly by. Each further issue we debated equally fully, the arguments going back and forth, so that we grew, some said, less flexible and more resigned, like soldiers in a useless war. And snow fell upon us, and wind blew, which in time abated. Where the snow had been, many flowers appeared, and where the stars had shone, the sun rose over the tree line, so that we had shadows again. Many times this happened. Also rain, also flooding sometimes, also avalanches in which some of us were lost. And periodically we would seem to have achieved an agreement, our canteens hoisted upon our shoulders, but always that moment passed. So after many years, we were still at that first stage, still preparing to begin a journey, but we were changed nevertheless. We could see this in one another. We had changed, although we never moved, and one said, "Ah, behold how we have aged, traveling from day to night only, neither forward nor sideward," and this seemed in a strange way miraculous. And those who believed we should have a purpose believed this was the purpose, and those who felt we must remain free in order to encounter truth felt it had been revealed. The next poem is in sections. There's a word that's repeated, the word nay, and in the first instance it's spelled Neigh, and in the second it's spelled Nay. An adventure. 1. It came to me one night as I was falling asleep that I had finished with those amorous adventures to which I had long been a slave. Finished with love, my heart murmured, to which I responded that many profound discoveries awaited us, hoping at the same time I would not be asked to name them, for I could not name them, but the belief that they existed, surely this counted for something. 2. The next night brought the same thought, this time concerning poetry, and in the nights that followed, various other passions and sensations were, in the same way, set aside forever, and each night my heart protested its future like a small child being deprived of a favorite toy. But these farewells, I said, are the way of things. And once more I alluded to the vast territory opening to us with each valediction. And with that phrase, I became a glorious knight riding into the setting sun, and my heart became the steed underneath me. 3. I was, you will understand, entering the kingdom of death, though why this landscape was so conventional, I could not say. Here, too, the days were very long while the years were very short. The sun sank over the far mountain. The stars shone, the moon waxed and waned. Soon faces from the past appeared to me. My mother and father, my infant sister, they had not, it seemed, finished what they had to say, though now I could hear them because my heart was still. 4. At this point I attained the precipice, but the trail did not, I saw, descend on the other side. Rather, having flattened out, it continued at this altitude as far as the eye could see, though gradually the mountain that supported it completely dissolved, so that I found myself riding steadily through the air. All around, the dead were cheering me on. the joy of finding them obliterated by the task of responding to them. 5. As we had all been flesh together, now we were mist. As we had been before objects with shadows, now we were substance without form, like evaporated chemicals. Nay, nay, said my heart, or perhaps, nay, nay. It was hard to know. 6. Here the vision ended. I was in my bed, the morning sun contentedly rising, the feather comforter mounded in white drifts over my lower body. You had been with me. There was a dent in the second pillowcase. We had escaped from death. Or was this the view from the precipice? Utopia. When the train stops, the woman said, you must get on it. But how will I know, the child asked, it is the right train? It will be the right train, said the woman, because it is the right time. A train approached the station. Clouds of grayish smoke streamed from the chimney. How terrified I am, the child thinks, clutching the yellow tulips she will give to her grandmother. Her hair has been tightly braided to withstand the journey. Then, without a word, she gets on the train, from which a strange sound comes, not in a language like the one she speaks, something more like a moan or a cry. The horse and rider. Once there was a horse, and on the horse there was a rider. How handsome they looked in the autumn sunlight, approaching a strange city. People thronged the streets or called from the high windows. Old women sat among flower pots. But when you looked about for another horse or another rider, you looked in vain. My friend, said the animal, why not abandon me? Alone you can find your way here. But to abandon you, said the other, would be to leave a part of myself behind. And how can I do that when I do not know which part you are? A sharply worded silence. Let me tell you something, said the old woman. We were sitting facing each other in the park at a city famous for its wooden toys. At the time, I had run away from a sad love affair, and as a kind of penance or self-punishment, I was working at a factory, carving by hand the tiny hands and feet. The park was my consolation, particularly in the quiet hours after sunset when it was often abandoned. But on this evening, when I entered what was called the Contessa's Garden, I saw that someone had preceded me. It strikes me now I could have gone ahead, but I had been set on this destination. All day I had been thinking of the cherry trees with which the glade was planted, whose time of blossoming had nearly ended. We sat in silence. Dusk was falling, and with it came a feeling of enclosure as in a train cabin. When I was young, she said, I liked walking the garden path at twilight, and if the path was long enough, I would see the moon rise. That was for me the great pleasure. Not sex, not food, not worldly amusement. I preferred the moon's rising, and sometimes I would hear, at the same moment, the sublime notes of the final ensemble of the Marriage of Figaro. Where did the music come from? I never knew. Because it is the nature of garden paths to be circular, each night after my wanderings, I would find myself at my front door staring at it, barely able to make out in darkness the glittering knob. It was, she said, a great discovery, albeit my real life. But certain nights, she said, the moon was barely visible through the clouds, and the music never started. A night of pure discouragement. And still the next night I would begin again, and often all would be well. I could think of nothing to say. This story, so pointless as I write it out, was in fact interrupted at every stage with trance-like pauses and prolonged intermissions, so that by this time night had started. Ah, the capacious night. The night so eager to accommodate strange perceptions. I felt that some important secret was about to be entrusted to me as a torch is passed from one hand to another in a relay. My sincere apologies, she said. I had mistaken you for one of my friends. And she gestured toward the statues we sat among. Heroic men, self-sacrificing saintly women holding granite babies to their breasts, not changeable, she said, like human beings. I gave up on them, she said, but I never lost my taste for circular voyages. Correct me if I'm wrong. Above our heads, the cherry blossoms had begun to loosen in the night sky, or maybe the stars were drifting and falling apart, and where they landed, new worlds would form. Soon afterward, I returned to my native city and was reunited with my former lover. And yet, increasingly, my mind returned to this incident, studying it from all perspectives, each year more intensely convinced, despite the absence of evidence, that it contained some secret. I concluded, finally, that whatever message there might have been was not contained in speech. So I realized my mother used to speak to me, her sharply worded silences cautioning me and chastising me, and it seemed to me I had not only returned to my lover, but was now returning to the Contessa's garden, in which the cherry trees were still blooming, like a pilgrim seeking expiation and forgiveness. So I assumed there would be at some point a door with a glittering knob, but when this would happen and where, I had no idea. Aboriginal Landscape. You're stepping on your father, my mother said. And indeed, I was standing exactly in the center of a bed of grass, mowed so neatly it could have been my father's grave, though there was no stone saying so. You're stepping on your father, she repeated, louder this time, which began to be strange to me since she was dead herself. Even the doctor had admitted it. I moved slightly to the side to where my father ended and my mother began. The cemetery was silent. Wind blew through the trees. I could hear very faintly sounds of weeping several rows away, and beyond that, a dog wailing. At length, these sounds abated. It crossed my mind. I had no memory of being driven here to what now seemed a cemetery, though it could have been a cemetery in my mind only. Perhaps it was a park, or if not a park, a garden or bower, perfumed, I now realized, with the scent of roses, douceur de vivre filling the air, the sweetness of living, as the saying goes. At some point, it occurred to me I was alone. Where had the others gone? My cousins and sister, Caitlin and Abigail. By now the light was fading. Where was the car waiting to take us home? I then began seeking for some alternative. I felt an impatience growing in me, approaching, I would say, anxiety. Finally, in the distance, I made out a small train, stopped, it seemed, behind some foliage, the conductor lingering against a door frame, smoking a cigarette. "Do not forget me," I cried, running now over many plots, many mothers and fathers. "Do not forget me," I cried when at last I reached him. "Madam," he said, pointing to the tracks, "surely you realize this is the end. The tracks do not go further." His words were harsh, and yet his eyes were kind. This encouraged me to press my case harder. "But they go back," I said, and I remarked their sturdiness as though they had many such returns ahead of them. "You know," he said, "our work is difficult. We confront much sorrow and disappointment." He gazed at me with increasing frankness. "I was like you once," he added, "in love with turbulence." Now I spoke as to an old friend. "What of you?" I said, since he was free to leave. "Have you no wish to go home, to see the city again?" "This is my home," he said. The city is where I disappear." Another prose poem called A Foreshortened Journey. I found the stairs somewhat more difficult than I had expected, and so I sat down, so to speak, in the middle of the journey. Because there was a large window opposite the railing, I was able to entertain myself with the little dramas and comedies of the street outside, though no one I knew passed by, no one certainly who could have assisted me. Nor were the stairs themselves in use as far as I could see. "You must get up, my lad," I told myself. Since this seemed suddenly impossible, I did the next best thing. I prepared to sleep, my head and arms on the stair above, my body crouched below. Sometime after this, a little girl appeared at the top of the staircase, holding the hand of an elderly woman. "Grandmother," cried the little girl, "there is a dead man on the staircase." "We must let him sleep," said the grandmother. "We must walk quietly by. He is at that point in life at which neither returning to the beginning nor advancing to the end seems bearable. Therefore, he has decided to stop here in the midst of things, though this makes him an obstacle to others, such as ourselves. But we must not give up hope. In my own life," she continued, "there was such a time, though that was long ago." And here she let her granddaughter walk in front of her so they could pass me without disturbing me. I would have liked to hear the whole of her story, since she seemed, as she passed by, a vigorous woman, ready to take pleasure in life and at the same time forthright without illusions. But soon their voices faded into whispers, or they were far away. "Will we see him when we return?" the child murmured. "He will be long gone by then," said her grandmother. "He will have finished climbing up or down, as the case may be." "Then I will say goodbye now," said the little girl. And she knelt below me, chanting a prayer I recognized as the Hebrew prayer for the dead. "Sir," she whispered, "my grandmother tells me you are not dead, but I thought perhaps this would soothe you in your terrors, and I will not be here to sing it at the right time. When you hear this again, she said, perhaps the words will be less intimidating if you remember how you first heard them in the voice of a little girl. And I'll read 2 more poems, one in sections and one a short prose poem. A Summer Garden, 1. Several weeks ago, I discovered a photograph of my mother sitting in the sun, her face flushed as with achievement or triumph. The sun was shining. The dogs were sleeping at her feet where time was also sleeping, calm and unmoving as in all photographs. I wiped the dust from my mother's face. Indeed, dust covered everything. It seemed to me the persistent haze of nostalgia that protects all relics of childhood. In the background, an assortment of park furniture, trees, and shrubbery. The sun moved lower in the sky, the shadows lengthened and darkened. The more dust I removed, the more these shadows grew. Summer arrived. The children leaned over the rose border, their shadows merging with the shadows of the roses. A word came into my head, referring to this shifting and changing, these erasures that were now obvious. It appeared and as quickly vanished. Was it blindness or darkness, peril, confusion? Summer arrived, then autumn, the leaves turning, the children bright spots in a mash of bronze and sienna. 2. When I had recovered somewhat from these events, I replaced the photograph as I had found it between the pages of an ancient paperback, many parts of which had been annotated in the margins, sometimes in words, but more often in spirited questions and exclamations, meaning, I agree, or I'm unsure, puzzled. The ink was faded. Here and there I couldn't tell what thoughts occurred to the reader, but through the blotches I could sense urgency as though tears had fallen. I held the book a while. It was Death in Venice in translation. I had noted the page in case, as Freud believed, nothing is an accident. Thus, the little photograph was buried again, as the past is buried in the future. In the margin, there were 2 words linked by an arrow, sterility, and down the page, oblivion. And it seemed to him the pale and lovely summoner out there smiled at him and beckoned. 3. How quiet the garden is. No breeze ruffles the cornelian cherry. Summer has come. How quiet it is now that life has triumphed. The rough pillars of the sycamores support the immobile shelves of the foliage, the lawn beneath lush iridescent, and in the middle of the sky, the immodest God. Things are, he says. They are, they do not change. Response does not change. How hushed it is, the stage as well as the audience. It seems breathing is an intrusion. He must be very close. The grass is shadowless. How quiet it is, how silent, like an afternoon in Pompeii. 4. Mother died last night, mother who never dies. Winter was in the air, many months away, but in the air nevertheless. It was the 10th of May. Hyacinth and apple blossom bloomed in the back garden. We could hear Maria singing songs from Czechoslovakia. How alone I am, songs of that kind. How alone I am, no mother, no father. My brain seems so empty without them. Aromas drifted out of the earth. The dishes were in the sink, rinsed but not stacked. Under the full moon, Maria was folding the washing. The stiff sheets became dry white rectangles of moonlight. How alone I am, but in music, my desolation is my rejoicing. It was the 10th of May, as it had been the 9th, the 8th. Mother slept in her bed, her arms outstretched, her head balanced between them. 5. Beatrice took the children to the park in Cedarhurst. The sun was shining. Airplanes passed back and forth overhead, peaceful because the war was over. It was the world of her imagination. True and false were of no importance. Freshly polished and glittering, that was the world. Dust had not yet erupted on the surface of things. The planes passed back and forth, bound for Rome and Paris. You couldn't get there unless you flew over the park. Everything must pass through. Nothing can stop. The children held hands, leaning to smell the roses. They were 5 and 7. Infinite, infinite, that was her perception of time. She sat on a bench, somewhat hidden by oak trees. Far away, fear approached and departed. From the train station came the sound it made. The sky was pink and orange, older because the day was over. There was no wind. The summer day cast oak-shaped shadows on the green grass. And the last poem is called A Work of Fiction. As I turned over the last page after many nights, a wave of sorrow enveloped me. Where had they all gone, these people who had seemed so real? To distract myself, I walked out into the night. Instinctively, I lit a cigarette. In the dark, the cigarette glowed like a fire lit by a survivor. But who would see this light, this small dot among the infinite stars? I stood a while in the dark, the cigarette glowing and growing small, each breath patiently destroying me. How small it was, how brief, 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 but inside me now, which the stars could never be. Thank you.